Hey everybody, how's it going? It's Dave Raposa. Hello. I wanted to come on here and do a little walkthrough of how I created my Legend of Zelda Link piece. That's the pen and ink one that I just put up on Patreon. So if you want to follow along and just see how I kind of came up with the idea, just, you know, hang around for a bit. This is going to be part one. I'm going to do a couple of these videos. It ended up taking me a bit longer than I thought. I think in total the piece ran me around 4 or 5 hours, something like that. So this is sped up by 2 times. So just a little bit faster. But yeah, I'll show you how I go through my process here. You can see on the screen, it originally started as kind of like a Russian framing device. I had gone to, I want to say, the museum in New York, the big one that for some reason I'm not saying right now. But I had gone to that museum and I was like, oh, this is really cool giant steel frame. I want to do something with that someday. And I thought, well, what better than Zelda? Because I felt like Zelda had a lot of that architecture in it, like a lot of angular, sharp lines. It kind of feels like that old ancient civilization style. I don't know what it is about it, but that was my initial thought. So you can kind of see here I'm doing something where I'm just kind of fucking throwing bottles around, little items and things. It's what ended up being in the final piece, but here I was thinking more of like almost an accessories thing with links sitting above it, kind of like a framing device, not so much a part of a giant scene or illustration like that. It would just be more ornamental shapes and things that would live on that frame. So you'll see me sketch around here and try and find something that works for that. I didn't feel like any of this really worked, so I didn't end up going for it. And I, deviated over to what you saw on the post. So, for better or for worse, this, I mean, it's not like a bad idea. I just think that for what I wanted to do with Link, like I wanted Link to come out and have his swords out, his sword out. And I thought that if Link were to have his sword out, I would need to go with a horizontal composition. So that's what I ended up doing, just to kind of, add to that drama of pulling the sword out. I needed to have that room there. What's funny is in the final inking thing that I do in this, I forget that I initially laid it out because Link is left-handed. I ended up putting the logo on it and all that, drawing that whole thing out with the canvas flipped so that he was right-handed. And I was like, oh shit, that's wrong. So that was funny. So yeah, the way that I'm doing this is I'm starting in Photoshop and I'm just using my chalky brush. If you followed along with the basics videos that I put out, it's the same brush that I used for my layout of that orc portrait, which is in the first basics video. So you can watch that if you want to see exactly how I'm using that brush. But that's what I'm doing here. I just find that in Photoshop, it's really easy to do the big, large brush strokes. If you've watched the other videos, you've heard me say that. So that was the idea. Just knock it out in Photoshop, do something simple with the composition, and then refine everything when I get into Clip Studio, which has been my technique for a while. But I do all of my pen and ink, like the way that it looks like real pen and ink. I do that all in Clip Studio because it's just far superior for that aesthetic. I haven't been able to duplicate that in Photoshop at all. But yeah, you can watch this and see how I work it out. And in the meantime, we can talk about Zelda because I've always wanted to work on Zelda. Zelda's been a part of my life since I was a little kid. Zelda, the Legend of Zelda, A Link to the Past was the first game I really ever got for Super Nintendo. I remember it was Christmas and we had a Nintendo that we got from like a yard sale. And we had Zelda on that too, but I wasn't super into it. I think I was just too young. I didn't really care. But then when we got a Super Nintendo, we got the one that came with A Link to the Past, that box, and I loved it. Like me and my sister played it a ton. She had like a ton of heart pieces, and I didn't really get it yet, but I played it like constantly. That and Donkey Kong Country. I think Donkey Kong Country ended up seeing more hours, but in the long run, I think I played Zelda more. And then when Ocarina of Time came out, I was just, blown away like everybody else because that was just one of the best games ever. And I played it over and over and over. I had the strategy guide for it to make sure that I got everything. I also got the strategy guide specifically so that I could look at all the artwork in it. I love that. That had a lot of really cool original, well, not like original to the strategy guide, but it had a lot of the original concept art for Ocarina of Time. So that was a cool way to look at it. And I kept that for a while just to kind of look through the artwork. Plus, it came with, I think, 2 posters, and I had both of those up in my room. So I've kind of always had that in the background for my career, is like wanting to do something Zelda related. I never knew exactly what, and I kind of never really had a chance to do much of it in general. So I did do something for a thing. I mean, I can't really ever talk about that, but there was some idea for like a Zelda thing, and I worked on it, and I got to do a bunch of kind of designs, and I was really happy with that, but that'll never see the light of day. I wish I could tell you what happened. I mean, maybe I can. All I know is that the higher ups have seen my stuff, and that was enough to make me happy. I'll leave it at that. I won't get specific in case I get in trouble. But I will say that's one of the high points of my whole career, is knowing that, the chosen ones have seen it. Even if nobody else ever gets to see it. That was nice. The thing that I got from that feedback was somebody high up there, and I mean high up there. You get the idea. They said, I can tell he knows a lot about the history and that he's a fan. And then I heard those words come back to me, and I went, wonderful. So I got close, but I've never really done anything for myself. And this is the first thing I've really done in, I don't know, years, I guess. And I wanted to do a traditional Link, so the Link from the NES. I think like everybody does Ocarina of Time Link or Breath of the Wild Link. And I like those Links, but nobody does the old like red hair Link. I really like the shield that he has in the original Nintendo NES artwork, like the cross on it. I think that looks really cool. And I liked in the concept art for that game, in Link's character art, you can see that he's carrying all of the potions and the boomerang, and he has like a backpack on with a ladder and rope and stuff, and he has like a wand and all the items that you get in the game. And I like that because it gives a sense of a bigger adventure and collecting all of these things. It feels very RPG. So that's what I wanted to get across in this, was just the same kind of look, and then, yeah, my own take on the style and all that. And I ended up mixing a couple things. I gave this Link the Ocarina of Time like gauntlets, and I did, what else did I do? I gave him the Master Sword from Ocarina of Time, and then I just kind of embellished and did my own thing with it. But most of it is taken from the NES game, which I was just like I'm a big fan of the original aesthetic of a lot of things, so I try to go back to the basics of whatever thing I'm doing fan art of. And that's why when you see my Garfield hentai, you can tell that I went all the way back to the very basics of what Jim had in mind. Jim went into it thinking, God, I want to be with that cat. I want to kiss it. And I was like, me and you, Jim, I got you. And that's why I did it. And Jim loved it. So that's what I try and do with everything that I approach as far as fan art goes. So this Link, I like the idea of the original concept of a kid just kind of being in his backyard playing and discovering things and going into caves and finding treasure. So that was always I don't know, kind of how I looked at the character in general, which I think is, I just feel like that's a very nostalgic feeling for going back to being like a kid and playing outside. Because I had a very similar childhood to kind of how I've heard that described. So, like, when I was a kid, I would go out into the woods, and behind my house in Carver, Massachusetts, out in the forest, there'd be like half buried homes, like really ancient homes, and hidden cemeteries that were like under leaves and things, and overgrown with trees. They're just old pilgrim graves. And then, lots of old machinery in the woods, like ancient tractors and things that were just totally grown over. The farms are gone. Whatever was there has been eaten by the earth. And the thought of going there and just finding little items and things and like old gears and old, you know, different pots and pans and whatever little like treasures, to me as a kid were left in the homes that are just basements basically. It's just the foundation of the house, just the basement. You go down there and you can collect everything and come out. And I'd be out there with my dog. And I always kind of felt like I was on some sort of adventure like that. So that idea is very appealing to me. And to get that across in the character Link, I think is cool. I actually really like the Breath of the Wild Link because of that. Because Breath of the Wild Link, I feel that that whole feeling is there very strongly, where Link gets a bunch of different outfits. You can collect a bunch of things. You can kind of, like, everything you pick up changes how you look. And I don't know how you feel about that, but like whenever I played RPGs or anything, if my look didn't change when I got new things, I was so disappointed. I was just like, what's going on? I remember I played Vandal Hearts 2. In Vandal Hearts 2, the armor would change every time you upgraded, which I thought was like, that's perfect. Like, that's exactly what I wanted. Also, Shining Force 2 did that, where in Shining Force 2, whenever you upgraded your characters, they'd get through this like leveling system where their appearance would change. And I was just like, yes, exactly that. And I think that as a kid at least, that made me want to continue playing all those games more than anything. So seeing that in Breath of the Wild, I think was really cool. And I think that that's kind of what I would imagine would happen in the original Zelda, is like everything that you get is like this new thing that changes you in some way, adds something to you, and then you could take with you, and it's just a nice, reminder that like, oh, you've grown or whatever, you have this new whatever thing. It's worth going and adventuring and finding and discovering. So I wanted to get that in this character by adding all of the items like the original Link. And I also like the idea of just like him wandering into the forest and discovering things. So that's why the background is just all greenery. I didn't want to do a dungeon, and I didn't want to do anything like scary or gloomy or like a boss area, nothing like that. I would like to do that maybe after the fact, but I think when I think of Link, I think of him in a forest. Maybe that's just because he starts there in Ocarina, but he's an elf, and or elfish. I don't know what you call him. And I just feel like that's more appropriate for him. So that's why I set him there. And what I'm doing is just refining. This isn't my like final sketch here on the screen. This is just a slightly refined sketch on top of the one that I did initially. The reason I do that is because I find that I'm able to, with each pass over top the sketch, I'm able to find more and more details and kind of pull from that initial thought, and just kind of build from there, rather than going off of that initial loose sketch and just trying to do final on top of that. And I correct things along the way as well. So I do this pass, and then I'll do a final line pass at the end where I'm doing all of these little tiny details, and I get really into the fine line work. So I keep the brush kind of big here with the chalky look. I'm not doing all of those tiny lines here. It's just implied detail for the most part. Just getting the shapes down. refining the sketch as much as I can, so that I have enough information going on for the final. But yeah, man, when that Breath of the Wild came out, me and my wife, we just played it a ton. It's kind of a bummer. Like I would love to play that stuff, but having a kid, I haven't had a chance to. But I can't wait for him to grow up. My son Axel. Well, I'm gonna have another son too in December, but um, just seeing kids with that kind of thing, I feel like is so cool. Playing a game like that, I loved that stuff when I was a kid. I was just so into it. I would stay up all night playing uh well, one of the big ones. I mean, I don't know how many of you have played this, but Chrono Cross. I love the designs in that game. So what I would do is on school nights I would just stay up all night playing that game, trying to get through it. I also had the strategy guide for that. I had strategy guides for a lot of the RPGs I played as a kid because I felt like I wanted to get everything out of the game, and I had such like a impatience to me, but I wanted to get through and see all the characters that I liked having the guide there. That if I hit a wall or it told me like, oh, you got to prepare for something, I'd know and I'd be able to just get right into it. Because the designs and the look of the world and the look of the characters, that's what really drew me into those games. Same thing with the Final Fantasy games. Is I went into like Final Fantasy 6 just kind of wanting to look at everything, and my progression through the game was more or less me trying to get to the next place where I could see the next boss design or see the new town or whatever, new summons. That was the kind of thing that pulled me in. So yeah, I would back in the day I would just stay up all night playing old RPGs and just have the worst time at school the next day. But I really, when I say like I relate to that idea of Link, it's like in more ways than one. When I was a kid, my dad, he didn't really trust school, so he he was very anti everything, like anti establishment, anti school, anti conformity, all that kind of stuff. He wasn't into conspiracies, but he was borderline there. And what he would do instead of bringing me to school was we would just get in the car and he would drive me to the top of my road that I grew up on. And because my mom was always so concerned about me getting an education and going to school and getting good grades, and she was all into me just having a life that was better than theirs, that she gets so upset. But I loved it. My dad would just drop me off and he'd be like, go play in the woods all day and don't come back till school's out, and then you can sneak back into the house. So I would do that, and I would bring my Game Boy, and I had like the original green screen Game Boy, and I would walk out into the forest, just me and my backpack. I'd have a couple snacks in it. I just kind of filled it up with stuff I wanted to bring into the woods. I'd bring like a sketchbook, I'd bring a book to read, I'd bring some comics, pencils and things. And then I would just wander the forest, and I would go to the very edge of my yard where I grew up and be like, I don't know, we had like over an acre or something like that, but we had a lot of forest in our yard. So I would sit at the edge of the forest and I would just yell for my dog because I didn't know if my mom was home. And then my dog would come run out into the woods and then hang with me all day. And we saw all kinds of stuff. We had to kill a homeless man once. My dog did most of the killing, tore out his throat, scattered all his intestines and things, and then I buried him in the bog. I just buried him in the mud. No, but we did see old remnants of like campfires and things where homeless people had been staying, and then I'd see hunters all the time, and they would just be completely quiet, sitting in the tree, like whatever you call them. I don't know why I can't think of the name. But just like the platforms in the trees, they'd just be sitting up there quietly waiting for animals to walk through, because I'd go out in the morning before school, and it was just really funny. And then I'd have all kinds of, crazy encounters with random people from my neighborhood and the town, and that was always pretty scary, but it was always an adventure. I just really like that. I love that kind of feeling of just discovering things and wandering. That was like Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild was like, if Breath of the Wild was white trash and you know, and you were worried about getting kidnapped, then that would have been pretty similar to how I grew up. Minus flying around and climbing cliffs. I did climb cliffs actually. I got chased a lot by people. That was always fun. You'd be out there all day and you'd have the people that like ran the bogs and things. They just assume that you were up to no good, that you were a big piece of shit. So they'd bring their trucks out and chase you around. And that was right around the time that I was almost kidnapped. So these guys came out dressed like clowns and tried to come and get me to go with them. So that was like the same time period. I don't know if you remember that, or if you've, I feel like the Q&As that I do on here are so long that probably only a small minority of the people who are on this Patreon actually get to those stories. But yeah, I was almost kidnapped by these guys dressed like clowns. Me and my neighbor, he's a little kid too, and it's pretty scary. Found out later that that was a real thing. I was like, did I imagine that? Did I make that up? When you're a little kid, you kind of think you make up some stories that you tell a bunch. Turns out it was real. I found that they had actually been doing that a lot. When my wife asked about it, we like Googled it. So there's a history of it. So you can see that I've more or less sketched out on top of that initial design, and I've found something that works. I've done the little forest bits and the trees and things, and feeling pretty good about it. At this stage, I could probably hop over into Clip Studio and start to work on it there and do the finals. I'm not sure if I do anything else here with it. Oh, okay, yeah, here it is. I'm jumping into Clip right now. So we'll see how this goes. So first thing I did, by the way, this image was too big. So when you see here and I start to do some line work over top of it, it ended up being not what I wanted, and it just looked a little too shitty. So I actually go in and redo the whole thing. Okay. So what I'm doing here is not what I just said. That does happen eventually. It's going to happen by the end of this video. What I'm doing here is refining the sketch one more time. So I'm doing this one final draw over. I'll do another one of these for like little things like the hands, but I don't do it for everything. But what I'm doing now is just a refinement of the lines. So this is another drawing pass, which will further my progress along so that I'm getting closer to being able to do the final. So yeah, that's what this is. This is using the watercolor brush, by the way. So if you're wondering what I'm using, it's that set to like 100% opacity, I think. On the screen, yeah, I think so, right? Maybe it's set to like 80. Well, whatever, you can set it to what feels good for you. But I'm essentially doing like an ink wash drawing over top to make sure that my lines are going to be good enough for me to do final inks over. So yeah. But no, yeah, I feel pretty good about this one. I feel like I got something close. It's not my favorite drawing, and I feel like I'd be able to do it better now. I mean, I really wanted to do something for you all to show kind of how I do a more detailed ink drawing, because most of what I've shared so far have either been short little mini tutorials to kind of walk you through basic stuff, or they've been preliminary drawings to paintings. The only other stuff that I had up was the X-Men portraits, but those I wouldn't consider very detailed. I didn't do like a final illustration in that style. So this is the first time I've shown you how I do a final illustration with a background and everything, and in a design, so the whole framing element and all that. I hadn't done that before on this Patreon, so I wanted to show you that whole progression. And this will probably be, I don't know, 3 parts, maybe 2, maybe a longer second part. I don't know. It'll probably be 3 parts. So it's a bigger drawing than I thought it would be when I was doing this. I thought like, oh, maybe it would take me another 2 hours after I finish this part, and then it ended up taking me, I think, like 4. So it's okay though. It's not a big deal. Most of my ink drawings, they don't take me super long. It's more or less because I do a bigger, or I do, because I did a bigger illustration here. Most of the things I do are character shots. So if I'm doing portraits of something, some character, whatever, they're just mostly like chest up, and that's easier for me. I can kind of fly through those. And if I'm doing like a comic, that's not a big deal either, because most of them are simplified scenes, things like that. So this approach is actually pretty close to how I did the Destiny comic. So if you can look it up. It's called Cade's 6. So the character Cade, and Cade 6 is a reference to the group of characters that Cade teams up with in the issues. But the first part is online. You can look at that. The second part is only in print. When the second part, I think, is better. But I don't know why they didn't release it online. But if you want to check that out, you can. I was pretty proud of that, and that's how I'm doing this. A lot of the shots in that comic were done in this same exact style, the same exact approach. So I was proud of that. I thought it looked cool. But if I did this kind of detailed scene for every shot, that comic would take a million years. So I don't usually go into the amount of detail that I do on the final illustration here. I mean, I would do this for something like a novel. Like if if I did like Conan or something like that, like the old black and white illustrated pen and ink for like old Conan and Cull books, I would do that in this kind of approach. But as far as doing every single scene like this, you could do that, and I could. It would just take me forever, which would be fine. I just, need a reason to do it. I am thinking of, if you saw my Twitter post where I posted that basketball manga cover I did called Fuck You. I do want to do, like, the joke that I have in my mind for that is that I want to do a super well done manga and just have it be in the same kind of thing like Steve is in the Garfield comic, where it's just like jokes and stuff. I want to do that, but just have it be like, I want to put everything into it. Just have it be like so well done that you're just mad that it's not something else. Like I like that idea of just, it's not a troll really, but it's like, I have such a hard time doing something that's cool, like cool in like a traditional sense of, oh, you really worked hard on that and it looks really good and it's a serious story. It's like, I can't do that. Like, I don't know what it is about me. I have such a hard time doing that. Like committing to something serious in a serious style. It's not as much fun to me. Like, it's funnier that like you would have an ability to do something like that and you would choose not to. Like, all of the people who have that ability don't ever draw stupid shit. So I'm like, well, that's a whole market that is untapped. I should do that. So that's why I think that would be good. Man, fuck you, basketball manga. I've already been thinking about it. I wrote some stuff. It's a lot darker than it seems. But I'm so excited. Hopefully I do it. Maybe I'm saying too much now, and by saying this, I won't. Hopefully I do. I'll write a mini chapter and do that, like the prologue or something. But the reason I brought it up is when I was doing this was right after, when I finished this, at some point between the videos that I already recorded. One of the videos I had stopped and I was like, I just have to do something else that isn't this detailed and crazy. So I just did that basketball manga thing. And I was like, man, I really love drawing in this style. I should just keep doing that. I should just make stupid comics. Because I feel like the Garfield thing, while I could do that, it's so vulgar and it's just not for everybody. Like, I couldn't actually put that out, and like, people like it for the meme of it, but I couldn't really get accepted with that. Like, people wouldn't actually, they'd read it, and there's definitely a chunk of people that would just read it. Like, the amount of times I've been asked to finish that thing is ridiculous. But I want to do something like that that isn't just a meme of a character that exists. Like, I want it to be about like a genre thing that I can just shit on and make fun of and make it go really crazy. So that's what I'm thinking for this basketball thing, because what's more boring than a, like, I always looked at those mangas like Slam Dunk, and I was like I watched the show, it's fine, but like, I always thought, just from an outsider perspective, like, man, that looks like shit. Who wants to read a manga about basketball? And it's just like, but what if it was insane? Like, what if that manga was just so horribly dark? And so that's what made me excited. Hopefully I do it. I'm not going to give myself any definite hope here as I watch myself draw Link from The Legend of Zelda. That's him swinging his sword. That's the sound effect. I just did it. It's really, really, really cool. And so am I. Oh, but it is fun to do fan art stuff, because when you're doing the fan art kind of thing, you can just test your style and play around with execution, because the character already exists. It's already a thing. You don't have to think about it. You can just throw something together, and as long as the character's the character, then, mission accomplished. It's fan art. But then you can push the limits of whatever stylistic approach you're going for. So with this, is like pushing my pen and ink approach, trying something different, or, if I want to just see how it looks with where I'm at currently, because I was doing this a lot, and then I started doing a lot of paintings, and now I'm coming back to this, and I kind of just want to see, like, does it hold up? Does it still look good? Or is it better? What's happened since my skills have progressed? Have I lost a little bit with this approach? And so on. So that's the idea. And then it's just easy to test that with something like this. I would really like to do Pig Ganon. I don't know if I will. I'm not saying that that's definitely happening, but I would like to do another pen and ink thing like this, but with the other characters. That'd be kind of neat. And not just straight up adapting them from the source as far as literally doing Pig Ganon, but just kind of mixing everything I like about each installment of Legend of Zelda and just making my favorite of all of them combined. So, might happen, might not happen. I don't know. No guarantees. I'm not sure what I'm doing. The only thing I'm sure of is that I'm very close to finishing that Asuka piece, the Evangelion piece. I'm like this close. I'm also back on, when the pandemic happened, I ended up losing pretty much all of my comic clients. They dropped off right away. Just that whole industry, they're not paying you to do anything anymore. So I was working on God of War, and they came back to me and they were like, will you be able to get back on the series again? Because, COVID, whatever happened, they worked around it and they're able to start printing again and doing all that. So I have to do a thing for God of War, because I said I would, like almost a year ago. And because it just halted, this Patreon came out pretty much the month before COVID really hit hard. And I thought that I was going to wrap up everything that I was working on. And I am now, because there's no way I'm going to be able to continue on all of the series that I initially said I was going to be on. Like I was originally the cover artist for the next run of US Agent for Marvel. I was going to be the main person for that, but because of everything that happened, it was just impossible. You know, I'm planning on Patreon being my only thing going during the time that my wife and I have our next baby, because it's just going to be so much else, you know, in the world. We're going to be parents with a little chunky boy again, and we also have another kid under 2, so we got 2 under 2, and that's going to be chaos. So I'll just be mostly hanging with you all and doing these, which is good because thankfully, and you know, thanks to you and everybody else who's on here, I'm able to cover pretty much everything. Like cover rent, cover bills, and I think like I'm not sure how much profit making off of this now. I mean, literally profit from like every bill is covered except for, I don't know, like insurance or something like that from my wife's side, but she works at the hospital, so that just comes out of her paycheck. But like, yeah, it's been crazy. It's so nice. I mean, like really, I can't thank you all enough. So because of that, I'll be able to just do this. And, you know, if you've noticed how much more I've been doing on here, and I'm just kind of taking the money that I get from Patreon and investing in stuff. So like I got the camera, and I got a bunch of other stuff coming in the mail. Like I have a whole new rig for this camera, because right now when I try and draw on here, it shakes like that. So that's not cool. But yeah, I've been able to do a lot more because of this, which is amazing. So hopefully I'll be able to get back into stuff like streaming and, you know, just staying regular on here and producing content, because this is the most fun. You know, client stuff is fun and challenging, but this is like freedom. It's like, just what do I want to challenge myself with? Let's do that. Oh, okay. Before this video ends, which I think, I don't know when it ends exactly, but what's coming up right here is I am doing the pen and ink, which is basically me doing a pass on another layer, on a multiply layer, and using that dopest pencil brush, which is my inking, my like fine line inking brush. But the problem is that this image was huge. So because this image was so huge, the screen might go black for a second, and I'm gonna pause it, and well, I'm gonna pause my recording, and then I'll hop onto the next part. So this video will just continue. But what I realized when I was doing this was that the actual file size was too big, so my lines weren't appearing as textured. If you watched my X-Men portraits video, you would have seen me talk about that. The quality of this brush doesn't really show through unless I'm working on something that's like 300 DPI, and the biggest like dimension on one side or the other is like 9,000 or something like that pixels, which is fine. It scales and it prints large, but it's not as big as it was. So I couldn't figure out when I was doing this. I was like, why does this look so shitty to me? Like, why is this fine line? It just looks ugly. You'll see when I switch over to the next part. I mean, I'll just do that right now, because the only thing that happens from here on out is that I do some rendering like this, and then I realize like, oh, I don't like this at all. And then it just doesn't work. So I take this into Photoshop, I resize it, I load it back into Clip, and then the next video starts. So I'll do that right now. Okay, so here I am back in the what? Back in the saddle again? Why did I say that? Back in Clip Studio, I've resized it. The actual resolution of this is 350 DPI. So that's what I ended up doing. And now I'm just re-inking what I already showed you I did. So I just got rid of what I had done before, and I'm doing that over again because I just didn't feel like it looked very good. Didn't have the texture I wanted. And you'll see just how much quicker this comes together because of that. Now I don't actually know exactly why that is, but lowering it, the size, I feel like it just makes it feel better. It's like quicker to draw in. I'm not sure. It's hard to explain. It just has a better feeling to it. Maybe it's just the feeling speeds you up. I'm not sure. But for some reason, all of my drawings come together much quicker in Clip Studio when it's this smaller size and smaller resolution. I don't know if that's a real thing or if it's just in my head. I mean, I know it makes me faster, but I don't know if that thing of making me faster is just mental, because it's like a feeling thing of like, oh, this is looking good. I'm going to continue on with this same energy throughout the whole thing. It might be that. In which case, I don't know what to say about that. There's something wrong with my mind. Things need to be perfect in my mind. Oh, this is a bad idea, drinking coffee at like 10 o'clock at night. But this is really the only time I do these recordings, because otherwise I'm living in, screams and stuff and things getting hit against the door. My kid wants to come in over there. He just like presses his face against the glass. So yeah, you can see it kind of just quickly coming together, just retracing those steps again. And nothing special is going on here. I don't have a whole lot to say as far as the technique. I'm following what I told you on the basics tutorial. So if you watch the first basics video where I cover my inking style for comics, that whole thing with thinking of things in terms of like wire mesh 3D models and wrapping lines around the forms like that, like following the form every time I'm putting down a line. That's basically all I do through this whole process. So yeah, that's mostly what's going on. God, I gotta say, being in here with the lights and stuff, it's like sometimes it gets so hot I just sweat my balls off. It's okay. I always see like people with those things on their hands, those gloves, those like black one finger gloves, because their hand sticks to their tablet. I've never had that problem. I bought that glove before and I put it on and I was just like, what the fuck am I doing? It's like, I don't even understand what this is. It's like my hands just sliding around. It's like, I don't know if I've ever needed that. Maybe it's because my hands are hairy. I don't know if you can see that. I've got some hair on my hands. Maybe this is my special power that glides across the canvas. It's possible. It's entirely possible. Maybe my sweat is actually like a seal fat, where I just sliding across the screen. It could be that. I mean, I have been getting, it could actually just be seal fat, because I've been getting fatter. I'll tell you one thing, I have to stop getting fatter. Oh, anxiety is the body killer, because my God, I just like, I've told you this in previous videos, but man, my eating habits are not good. I don't know if it's the quarantine thing, because that's not an excuse. I've always been in quarantine. I've been in quarantine for 15 years. It might just be because I have so much work to do, or I give myself so much work, and I have a kid, and I try to balance my life in such a way where I'm never doing any one thing too much as far as work goes, and I make sure to spend as much time as possible with my family, and I'm always doing the same things with them no matter what. Like I never let work get in the way of that. So I think maybe that kind of stress pushes me to food, and boy, oh boy, I've just I'm rolling down the hill. And what I'm saying is that it is definitely the seal fat. The seal fat of my body is making it so I can draw so quick. That's why my speed has changed. Flying across this tablet, just a big greasy piece of shit, just flying through everything. So if I can change that part of my life, that would be wonderful. I really just need to commit to a system of working out. I'm sure plenty of you feel the same way. But if I don't turn this ship around, I think I'm right at the tipping point where it could go one of two ways. And if I don't change it in the next like couple months, some irreversible damage is going to happen. Because I'm sure I'm not healthy. And actually, we just had a family member who potentially may have been infected with COVID and then spread it around to a bunch of people. Not to us, thankfully, but man, I'm feeling for everybody. So I think about that stuff too. I'm like, oh, I got to get in shape. Because if you're not in shape and all of a sudden that shit hits you, it's just worse and worse. So I got a whole gym set up in my garage. Got to get on that. We should start well, I got to figure out how to use the Discord on here. I'm actually not even 100% sure on that. I've never used Discord. I've used it like to sign in and look at. I don't know anything about it. I have to watch some YouTube tutorial videos finally. I mean, now I should, because there's so many people on here. I need to let that Discord be open, and then maybe we can all do an exercise, a stop being monsters challenge, where we change our bodies. That would be good. I was doing that on the streams before, and that was a nice motivation. So maybe I'll do that again. If you want to join me. I have to do something though. My God. Because my wife is pregnant, so she's been eating just chaos. Just nothing but chaos. It's like, oh my God. Man, when I was a little kid, I was just thinking about, the reason I'm about to say this is I was just thinking about the difference between when I was a kid and looking at like Link here and like what I do now. It's like when I was a little kid, I was so active. I did everything. I played outside constantly, and my family didn't have a lot of money. We were pretty poor, but my dad, he would always build things in the backyard for us to play on. So we'd have like a ladder would be nailed between trees, and that would be like the monkey bars, and then we'd have a whole obstacle course through the forest with like old tires and things, like kind of, boot camp style. And then we also had, and this was kind of the crazier thing, was my dad built this, the shot put champion for the state lived across the street from us. And it was my brother's best friend, who coincidentally also is the kid who would shit in my backyard. He would come over to my house when I was a kid, and then he would shit in the backyard of my house, and he had a pet squirrel that would run around his shoulders and down his arm and stuff, and sleep with him in his bed. And anyway, he grew up to be the shot put champion. So we had this big old rope swing, and my dad put a rock on it, tied like a smaller rope to the bigger rope, and then put a rock on that smaller rope, tied it around it, and then the shot put champion shot putted it up over this huge tree branch on this old oak tree. So we had this giant rope swing, and it swung out, and you would go like 20, 25 feet in the air above the ground, because it was on like a sloping hill. And then we'd have these like tree forts, not forts, but more like platforms in the trees. So they'd be like 10-foot wide platform that you could swing to, because it was on a hill. So you'd like swing out over the hill, land on this platform in the trees, and then there was nails on the trees where you could hang the rope. And I basically lived in like a Link world. And besides that, there were my dad got this wire, like a wire with a coating on it, like a metal wire, and he would tie it around a tree and then nail it to the tree, and then pull it across down the hill to another tree. One was on the platform and one was at the base of the hill. And he got these like, what would you call it? I don't know, like pulley wheels kind of thing. These like plastic pulley wheel things. And he made zip lines. So you'd hold on to like, I don't know if you ever had this, but they used to have these like plastic construction sets, and you could like make forts and things in your house. Then they had like these yellow tubes, and they'd have like holes in the ends of the tubes, like 3 holes. Anyway, My dad drilled a hole in the center of one of those big, thick plastic tubes, and then he put a cord through it, and then brought it up to the pulley system. In what we would do, or pull, I don't know what you'd call it, whatever the wheel is. And what you do is you just hold on, and you go down, and you could like zip line to the platforms, and it was so cool. And it's very Ewok village like. But anyway, I grew up like that, and now I look at what I'm doing, and I'm like, I just sit all day. Mostly, I just want something like that for my kid. Really, when I think about that kind of thing, I just want something cool like that for my kid to grow up with. But we need land to do that, and Colorado doesn't have very much in the way of land, as far as like a suburban house near a city or something. Nobody has land. It's like these weird. I mean, I don't know how many of you live in like west of the middle of America, or I don't know how common this is because I grew up in New England, but there's these like developments that they're all the same exact house, and nobody has any kind of acreage or nothing like that. Like, as where I grew up, you could be poor and have like, 3+ acres of land. And pretty much most of the people I grew up with either had land or lived on the edge of a forest, and it didn't matter because you just had the forest, even if you didn't own it, and you just play all day. So, yeah, it's weird being out here. I'm like, oh, what do kids do? I'm like, what do little kids do to play and stuff? You got to be like Link. You got to be out in the woods discovering things and, going on adventures. Yeah. It makes me feel like how I grew up was like a fairy tale or something like that. Like, it was so cool. Because like I've never lived in a place like that. Well, I lived in New Hampshire for a little while, and that was a lot like that. New Hampshire is very open, and you kind of just do whatever. Lots of forest, lots of like beautiful mountains and waterfalls and hidden places because it's so dense. You can kind of just wander through the woods and find things. So it's like that there. And maybe I'll move over there at some point, my family. But the winters are brutal. You just can't beat it, though, that sense of adventure, It's very much like a Breath of the Wild situation, I think. At least to me it is. I don't know how it is where you live, but I always love that. I love living on the edge of a forest and just wandering out. I took my wife out to the forest where I used to go through. Like, that was one of the first things we did together when she came out to visit my family. And she was just like in love with it because we went out and it was kind of perfect. It was fall. So, you have all the vibrant colors that are in the Northeast America in the United States. And you also had like this rolling fog because it had just rained. So she got to see the forest, like, because it's never foggy here in Colorado. That's where she's from. So you would never see that here. So over there, it was just like dense forest, fog, like all these warm reds and gold colors in the trees. And she just kind of was like, I can't believe you grew up with this stuff. And I'm like, I can't believe it. Like, man, I miss that stuff. I miss wandering the woods and catching animals. Did I kill a few animals when I was a kid? Absolutely. Did I turn into a serial killer? Not yet. So we'll see. But I did have I was much like Link in where I had a net, and I would catch frogs and then put them in my family's above ground pool. And my dad was like, hey, don't do that. And I was like, I'm going to keep on doing that. And then I filled it up with frogs, and something magical happened, something you maybe wouldn't believe. But all of the frogs died. So it was a giant mausoleum for the frogs of the Gate Street Bogs. And yeah, we ended up having to smash the wall out of the pool, and then hundreds of frogs, their dead bodies, bloated, rolling down the hill. just rolling down the hill into the dog poop and everything else. It was a very dark moment. And guess what? I had no emotions about it. And that's what I'm saying. I'm not yet a serial killer. Jury's out. I have the upbringing. So maybe it'll happen eventually. I just need to meet the right type of girl. What size are you? You know, that kind of thing. And load them into the van. And then take my master sword out. Charge it. And let loose. But yeah, I had a lot of cool moments like that. I mean, going on adventures, not murder. I don't have a lot of cool murder moments. Only a couple. I was actually going to tell this story, I think, on the next stream or the next Q&A because somebody asked about it. I'm sure it was a leading question because whoever asked, I think, already knows what I'm going to say. It felt that way anyway, from old streams and things. I told stories. But one of the things I did was when I was a little kid, I jumped on my bog. Well, not my bog, but the bog behind my house. I had a net. I saw a water moccasin. It showed its fangs, and then I beat it to death and threw it on my roof, and it decayed in the sun for a long time. It actually came alive halfway. Well, it came alive. It was alive. It was just knocked unconscious, and then it came back when I was walking back to the house, and then it puked up a whole frog, and then I beat it on the pavement. I was a crazy little kid. I was super aggressive because I think, like, when I think about it through the, rose-colored glasses, I'm like, oh, I was a crazy kid, and I just had a lot of, wild thoughts and had a temper, and my brother would make me fight all of the kids that were older than me, because my brother's, what is he, 5 years older than me, 6 years older than me, and he would, maybe more than that, but he would take me to people's houses with like older kids his age, and make me fight them. So I would always get in fights and whatever. And that ended up being a thing in school, and I get in trouble a lot. But like, it was because I grew up. I think mainly it was that amount of aggression probably came from having like a crazy parent, where my mom was a little wild. And, I've told you all the exorcism story, where I had an exorcism performed on me when I was a kid, which is another very Legend of Zelda adventure. You know, that scene where he goes into the tomb and it's like, an ocarina of time. That's what it was like, except it was a bunch of church people surrounding me. And one of the church people that was surrounding me had all of their fingers chopped off because they tried to bring God to a place where they were like, God, we don't want God. We want your fingers. And they chopped all his fingers off. And then, he was useless after that. Well, all except for giving 12-year-olds exorcisms. I didn't have a demon, turns out, but that was one of the many adventures and one of the things that turned me into a little rage monster when I was a kid. And I was always getting in trouble and things, and my escape was always the forest. I would go out into the woods with my dog, and I would just play by myself for hours. It's funny to think about that kind of thing now, because I'd always get asked about drawing, of like, how do you do gesture things or action poses, or like, how do you come up with stuff from imagination? I think so much of that, like, people tell you build up a visual library, but I think so much of that was because I played so much as a kid, and I was always fighting, and my dad would buy me like weapons, or we'd make weapons together. Like, my dad had an antique shop, and we just had a bunch of spare metal parts and just parts in general everywhere. So we would use a vise, and we would clamp down like aluminum pipes, just crush them flat, and then use his buffer wheel to sharpen the edges. And then I would put electric tape around the handle, and then he'd make me like a, what do you call it when you block your hand? Hilt for the sword. And I had that. I had a bunch of real machetes and things, and I would just play all day in the woods, like all day. And I think that because I played so much and I got into doing even things like gymnastics, I would do like flips and things and always be making up fight scenes in my head. And if I wasn't doing that outside constantly, I was doing that with toys and, had the G.I. Joes where you could bend them any which way you wanted. And I think I was so aware of that. And I watched like a ton of Jackie Chan movies and like action movies, Van Damme and all that stuff that you watch when you're a kid. And it just stuck with me. So I thought about it all the time. So that's why it's just kind of there, like something I can access in my mind whenever. And when I'm doing like any kind of comic work, that's where my mind goes. If I'm doing an action scene, is I just think of that stuff and I don't reference anything. I just kind of, I don't know. Maybe it's just because I looked at it so much or thought about it so much that it's just ingrained in some way, whether or not it's perfect, just the feeling of it's there. So I can kind of pull from that. It's just weird how much of those little things that you grow up with end up influencing you in different ways. So it's like whatever you were into as a kid, that's going to be something that you can leverage later on as some kind of strength. And, well, maybe it works more so in art. I don't know. But just the visual thing and the kind of the feeling thing, like so much of that comes through. Maybe I'm looking too much into it, but it feels like that. It feels like that's why those things come a bit easier. Like I didn't have to study so much anatomy. It's like you have whatever you were studying visually without even knowing you were doing it. It's funny how you don't really think about the strengths that you have when you're young like that because you don't think of it that way. You just think like this is just something I do every day. And then, you do your best learning when you don't know you're doing it. Kind of feels like that. Yeah, I can look at all these little tiny details I'm putting in here. It's like, my goodness. It's so much. I mean, it doesn't take me so long. Like I think a lot about painting when I'm doing this. So it's like most of what's going into this is my whole idea of like rendering paintings. So that's kind of how I approach inking, is almost like I'm just adding values the way I would, value the scale light to dark, how I would in a painting. Like that's kind of how I'm going at it. Like I'm not thinking literal lines, like everything's outlined, everything's a perfect whatever defined shape like you would see in a regular comic book. I'm thinking more like about the lighting and how that works. It's like, so not everything needs to be broken down into defined shapes. It can have implied shapes based around the lighting that it has. So that's kind of what I'm doing here. So if it seems like I'm, rendering out these forms and it's kind of like, I don't know, not just like straight up line work of like outlining and detailing. It's because I'm just thinking of like the value range of how I would build that up with the lighting, as opposed to thinking about it like a drawn character. It's very much just how I paint. Like I could, the same brush strokes or the same lines that you see on the body, like here in the chest, that would be brush strokes if I were doing a painting. So it's the same kind of thing, just smaller in a different style, but similar. But yeah, I tried to bring a lot of that kind of Legend of Zelda-y thing into my workspace because I love that adventure feeling. So I always wanted to have a bunch of items from all over the world. And I think that also comes from just the RPG. Growing up with RPGs, it's like you travel a bunch and then you see a bunch of things and you get to interact with different cultures and you get different characters joining your team from everywhere. So I always loved that, and I got so into stuff like the designs of different artists working on those things, like Yoshitaka Amano, and I kind of would see that and think like, oh, that's so cool. He's just like coming up with this stuff from thin air. And then you realize how many things he's influenced by in cultures and dress and just the amount of richness there is surrounding somebody's art style. And I just realized that as a kid, I was like, oh, I just need to be exposed to more things. So I try to have that here. I mean, maybe I can show you here. Let's see if I can show you this without ruining everything I'm doing. But if you can see back there, I have a bunch of random shit in here. If you can see back there, I have a Balinese door. It's pretty huge. This is like a fisheye kind of effect with the lens, so you can't see how big it is. But I have like a huge custom door that I had made when I was in Bali teaching Indonesia. So, and then I have a bunch of Balinese masks up here, which I think are really cool. And yeah, I'll pull one down for you so you can see it. Hold on a second. Let me go grab it. Okay, so I keep a lot of stuff like this. I don't know if you can see that. But I keep a lot of stuff like this so that I have different kinds of influences in my work, like surrounding myself by random things. Like I bought my buddy Dan, we're both into this kind of thing. I bought him like a Persian shield and like helmet and all these things. It's just cool to have all of the cultural elements around you if you can afford it. You know, like I think this was, when I was in Bali, I think this cost me like maybe $100. And yeah, whenever I see things like this, I'll just grab it, put it in the studio, hang it up, and it's just a reminder. It's just something that's there. I want it to be normal enough that I don't have to think of it. It's like it's always in here because I see it every day. But yeah, like check out how cool this stuff is. And over in Bali, this is just normal, you know? Like they don't even think twice about this kind of thing. It's not special, really. It's like art over there, and sculpting is so normal that they don't really. They have like 1 million of these. You can just buy them. You can buy these on eBay too. The price is just jacked up. But I collect stuff like that because I feel it influences my work in a really positive way, because it helps to see the things that you're kind of aiming at as far as a new take on an idea or a cultural aspect you want to introduce. So I can show you, I want to see if I have anything else that's immediately at hand. A bunch of the other things that I have are just in different spots in the house. I have like taxidermy heads of animals. I have what is it? I have a ram over in the stairway. And just, you know, I have an alligator head over here and a few skulls. I have like a really detailed human skull up here. And then I have like bits and pieces of historical things like dress and whatever. And, you know, here's another thing I have that's right here that I can show you. This is a bearded dragon just in a jar. I bought this from an oddities store here in Colorado. So I collect things like this so that I don't have to look up reference for stuff like this. I can just kind of look around my room. You know, obviously it's like a luxury item to just have something, you know, taxidermied in a big jar. But it is really nice to just have little bits and pieces of the world around you. I feel it helps. I have an octopus in a jar somewhere too. I also have a whole room full of human body parts, so you should come check that out. And, you know, maybe you'll get added to it. You know, I'm dipping my toe in being a serial killer. I haven't totally decided whether or not that's something I'm committed to. So we'll see. Oh, okay. The video's over, so I will see you in part 2 of this. if it may end up being 3 parts, I'm not sure. Part 2 just might be a much longer thing. So I hope that this was helpful or just entertaining. Yeah, I'll talk to you in the next one. Thanks as always for supporting the Patreon. In my family, we greatly appreciate it. I got something in my eye. I don't know what's going on. It just started spasming. And I'll probably pull up some more stuff too for future videos, because it's nice to show what I have access to in here, and kind of what I'm not really I'm thinking about, because sometimes you're like, oh, I take it for granted that I've already collected stuff and I leave it around, where people are like, where do you come up with ideas for things? It's like, well, sometimes it's just the stuff I have right around the office that I've just found online or saw in a shop and thought like, oh, that's really cool. And everything's, as a freelancer, all this stuff is tax deductible, so it's nice to be able to buy something like that and then just take it off my taxes. And with a kid, I try to buy so little things, but when I do find something that I feel is really cool, it's nice to have that reason to take something off of the income. But yeah, so just some thoughts and stories. And I'll talk to you in the next video, which should be coming out pretty soon. So see you then, and have a good night or a good day, and goodbye.